Feeling stuck in a relationship with my unmotivated girlfriend. How do I move on without leaving her homeless? I, 24M, met a girl, 22F, in a community college class when I was 20. We came from very different backgrounds. I was middle class, using community college as a more affordable path to my degree, while she was living in near poverty, attending school only because her parents forced her under the threat of kicking her out. She dropped out about a year into her studies, while I continued and eventually graduated. During that first year, we developed a relationship, and she more or less moved into my apartment. Her relationship with her parents is virtually non-existent, and she has very few friends outside of one or two women from high school, who, in my opinion, are not great influences. I earn around $80,000 a year, so we live relatively comfortably, though finances still have their challenges. I can't pinpoint exactly when my feelings started to fade, but her refusal to work, lack of interest in cooking, insistence on eating out daily, unwillingness to return to school, and constant spending on clothes and other unnecessary items have gradually worn me down. I work in a female-dominated workplace, and seeing, having conversations, and interacting with coworkers who have so much going for them, have fun hobbies, and aspirations makes it all the more worse when your girlfriend is chronically online and spends 7 hours a day scrolling through Instagram or TikTok Reels and thinks having sex is all she needs to do on her end. Our relationship isn't bad, we have fights every now and then like an average couple, have an active sex life, but that's pretty much it. From her perspective, if I broke up with her it would be out of nowhere, but I'm pretty much done, and know I could move on quickly and have nothing to be regretful about, as shitty as it sounds. The problem comes in her having no job, no finances, almost no friends, and no family support unit. I'm not a monster, I don't want to make someone virtually homeless, but I don't want to be stuck with someone who has nothing going for them either. I don't know what to do. Edit. Thank you for all the advice in this post. I don't know if this sub allows updates, but I'll talk to her tomorrow about this and start the process of working this out. Update. First off, I want to thank everyone for the advice in my last thread. It really helped me figure out how to approach the situation. When I wrote that post, I was having an incredibly rough day and didn't expect it to gain so much attention. Looking back, I don't think I gave her a fair defense. I also received a wide range of messages, some completely inappropriate, like people asking for her contact info so they could take her in as a live-in girlfriend, while others offered genuinely helpful advice, including suggestions to start securing my valuables. When I mentioned that she came from poverty, I meant that her father works as a laborer, and her mother lives a similar lifestyle to how she does now. Their home is about 1,100 square feet in a rough part of town, and given her father's past ultimatum, I doubt he would take her back since she hasn't returned home in years. Yes, I have talked to her about this, multiple times since January. I've tried everything, from gently encouraging her to get out more and find a hobby to directly telling her that she's wasting her time on her phone and needs to get a job or go back to school. Each time, she either changes the subject, makes a joke out of it, or follows through for a few days before slipping back into old habits. She is a kind partner, who asks me about my day, always tries to make me laugh or lighten the mood when I get annoyed, and generally shows a lot of affection. Which makes me feel terrible when none of that works anymore, and I just see her as another person. Now for the confrontation. Last night when we were both getting ready for bed, I didn't take my clothes off and instead just stood there telling her we needed to talk. At first she was just smiling and jumping up and down on the bed with her knees, thinking I wasn't as serious as I was, but eventually she was able to read the mood. I told her something wasn't feeling right anymore, that I've tried to make this work and be patient with her for the past few years, but I didn't know how much more time I was willing to spend waiting for her to get a job, go back to school, or just get a hobby if anything. I told her that it annoyed and grated me that she just didn't seem to care about herself, and that I hated she had no goals or aspirations. For the first time in a long while, she was fully engaged in the conversation. She agreed with everything I was saying, even offering suggestions on places she could apply for work and talking about courses that had started to interest her. She even said I could sit with her while she submitted applications online to prove she wasn't just saying things to appease me. It was clear that, in her mind, she believed I was still willing to make this relationship work. And for a brief moment, even I started to believe that this could finally be the turning point where she would change. That made what I had to say next even harder. At first, I told her that I didn't love her the same way anymore. That slowly led to me admitting that, truthfully, I didn't feel anything at all about this relationship. I had become numb. I was exhausted and wanted a fresh start with someone who was more driven, someone who actually wanted something out of life. When she realized what I was really saying, she started crying and asked why I hadn't brought this up sooner. I told her that I had asked her countless times to cook, to go out and try new things with me, to go back to school. I had even offered to pay for her classes. Anything. She said she understands that part, but was upset why I didn't say it was leading to me losing interest in her, because from her perspective it seemed as if I still loved her all the same. She started apologizing, saying she wasn't in the right mental state and saying nothing was motivating her, and she genuinely had no interest in any hobbies. The only thing she liked was spending time with me, which is all she looked forward to in the day when I came home. None of this was really affecting my emotions besides making me feel uncomfortable, so I tried to continue by saying, I think her lifestyle would be better with another person, but she immediately cut me off and became more panicked. She started to apologize again for what she's done and said she would be a better girlfriend, that she would go with me tomorrow to wherever I wanted to go, and would look for courses in August that she could start doing. But she did not want to lose me since she had nothing else in life, and absolutely hated that I stopped loving her. There were so much tears and snot that I said we would have this conversation again when she calmed down, and we eventually did in an hour or so. She pleaded to give her 2 months to make a change and give her another chance, and promised that she would change. Again she listed off all the places she would apply to and said she would be a better partner. I never wanted to make her homeless, so this seemed like a good settlement, even though I still had my doubts. I then reiterated that I wanted to move on and see other people. However, she was much more resistant to this than she had been about the issue of ambition. She insisted that she could fix things if I just gave her a chance. She begged for a month to try and make the relationship work, repeatedly asking what she could do to make me love her again. She also pleaded with me not to hate her. She said the worst part of all this was that I was the only person she had, and now I was just done. She seemed like she was on the verge of breaking down again, so I told her, okay, we'll see how things are in a month. In my mind, since I was already giving her 2 months to figure out her next steps, I figured by the 1-month mark, she would be more prepared to move on. I also didn't want to push her into a complete mental breakdown while we were still living together. Giving her this month to try and fix the relationship would hopefully give her time to process and accept reality. Last night, I slept on the couch, and I'll probably keep doing so for a while. Around 3 a.m., she came out wanting to talk more, but I told her I was exhausted and we could talk tomorrow. Instead of going back to bed, she lay down on the floor beside me, quietly apologizing over and over. When I finally told her to stop, she whispered okay and cried softly under her blanket. That's where things stand for now. This has been one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but I don't regret it. I feel lighter now that everything is out in the open. I don't know how things will look in 2 months, but I was clear that this is the deadline. This post will probably get lost in the shuffle, so I don't think I'll do another update. Besides, I doubt many people will still care in a week or a month. But I'll definitely reach out privately to those of you who have been supporting me through this or who just want to know how things turn out. So yeah, thanks. Edit, for those asking, I'm a registered nurse, RN. Update. I feel like this is a better place to post since it's my own page, and I don't have to worry about overloading other spaces with small or minor updates. This way, it's only here for those who actually want to read it. To everyone who has privately messaged me, I want you to know I've read every single one. I especially appreciate those of you who have shared your own experiences. Knowing that others have been through something similar has meant a lot. Lately, I've been doing some self-reflection and feel like I have a clearer idea of how I want to handle things, particularly when it comes to improving my communication. I know I'm not perfect, but I still stand by the decisions I made that night, 100%. I might post an update sooner than expected, maybe in a week or so. The day after our argument, I actually felt a bit more hopeful than usual. I don't know how long that feeling will last, but I figure I should make the most of it while I can. Again, I just wanted to post this as a thank you to everyone who has shared their stories with me privately. I can't respond to each of you individually, but your messages have helped me more than you know as I figure out my next steps. 1 week from OG post update. This is a long post, and no, I'm not providing a TLDR. Hey everyone, it's been about a week since my last update, and I figured I'd share what's been happening. A lot has unfolded, including my previous update unexpectedly blowing up. I've received over 50 plus DMs asking for a follow-up, so instead of copying and pasting individual replies, I'll just post everything here. I find writing much easier than speaking in many situations, so this has been a great way to process my thoughts and make decisions. Putting everything into words has helped me a lot, and I plan to continue until this situation is completely resolved, after which, I'll probably wipe everything. Following that night's confrontation, things were pretty quiet at home. The atmosphere was dry and awkward for a day or two. Luckily, I've always been a workaholic by nature, so burying myself in hospital shifts became a good distraction. During that time, though, she did start cooking again, though we weren't exactly in the mood to go out and eat together. Eventually, she asked for a more in-depth conversation about why I felt our relationship was failing. She assured me that she wouldn't cry or get upset and that she just wanted me to be completely honest so she could fully understand. She said she was willing to do whatever it took to fix things. I was really apprehensive about this and I can't really explain why, but given being together for 4 years I wanted to at least make an effort myself out of respect, even though a large part of me was angry for even doing so, as I feel I've never had the same from her. There have been many different camps in my last update, the main ones being kick her out immediately and leave her before it gets worse, try to find a way to fix our relationship, or end the relationship altogether but continue living with someone who would probably become absolutely neurotic. If I was going to let her stay for 2 months I would absolutely not be dealing with that. I took consideration in all these main advice discussions and read through almost every reply. Even the most assumptive, bizarre and downright unhinged Redditor takes. More importantly, I took heavy influence of those who have shared with me their past stories, which either led to them being stuck in loveless relationships for years or eventually being able to overcome their problems and have an even stronger connection. Thank you again for your private messages. I read through a lot of your lives. Now for our conversation. She said she saw something on TikTok where couples put a phone on a table with a timer and wanted to do something similar, for each person to air what made them upset. I said that was dumb. If we were going to talk about our problems it would be better if there was no time limit. She eventually agreed and said I could go first, asking me first when was the time that I completely lost my love in her. As I said before, it was never one action, but a grating feeling that got worse and worse until it got to this point, and I told her that. So she then asked when was the time I felt the most angry. I said it would take some time to think for me and she said that was fine. After a few minutes something came to mind. I couldn't formulate the right words at first but it eventually just started to come out. I told her the worst time was when I was first starting at my hospital. To keep it short, the tempo was brutal, it was constant work with little to no downtime as I was constantly learning new things that school would have never taught me. While being expected to be able to handle it as a professional, it was without a doubt the most stressed I've ever been, and I feel like other RNs can relate here. That year hardened the way I think now, that hard work does pay off, if you have the drive and the passion. I told her I think that was when I started losing feelings the fastest, seeing her at home doing absolutely nothing. Coming home to no food made, to her not working a job, to her not learning anything, completely stuck to the internet with nothing to show for it. I told her that what frustrated me the most was how I had repeatedly suggested jobs with flexible schedules or encouraged her to explore new academic interests that might have suited her better than last time, only for her to reject every attempt I made to help. I admitted that, at this point, it disgusted me. She asked why I hadn't made this a bigger issue earlier, why I didn't communicate my frustrations more clearly. I told her that some things shouldn't have to be spelled out. I shouldn't have to remind her to practice basic hygiene, eat properly, or do anything besides mindlessly scrolling on her phone for hours every single day. I also explained that after long, stressful shifts at the hospital, the last thing I wanted was to come home and spend my energy begging my girlfriend to do something productive. So, I kept my mouth shut and convinced myself to settle because, at the very least, she was still kind and caring. But over time, that unspoken frustration turned into deep resentment. At this point in the conversation, I'll admit I got harsher than I intended, and I regret it now, but I want to be honest about everything that was said. I told her that when she dropped nursing, I was initially disappointed because I knew she was fully capable of completing the program, just like I had. But the longer we were together, the more I realized that, with the kind of person she was, she would have never made it through. That's why I had suggested easier, low-stress jobs, less demanding majors, or even just picking up a hobby, anything. If she had started cooking regularly or found something she was passionate about, I would have appreciated the effort. But she chose to do nothing for years. That's just who she is, and it's why, over time, my feelings for her faded completely. She asked me if I hated her, and I said I didn't know. I told her she was very loving and kind, but I hated how she handled her life to this point. That I felt no ill will towards her after airing everything out, but I also felt nothing else. I just felt done and ready to move on. Throughout this conversation we kept eye contact, and there were times it seems like she would break, but like she said, she remained as calm as she could while I said what I had to say. I told her I was done and she could say her piece now, but she asked if we could continue the conversation later and locked herself in our room for the rest of the day. The next day we sat down again and finished the conversation. She told me that she thinks she's depressed, saying that she didn't feel sad before that night, just had no motivation of doing anything. I had a couple of messages telling me to ask her to get tested for ADHD, but when I started bringing it up she was very adamant that is not something she felt comfortable with. I knew she didn't like needles or going to the hospital in general, but her flat-out refusing to get tested for disorders when I told her it was not at all like a regular hospital visit surprised me. She asked me if she was able to change in her behaviors, would I give her another chance? I said I didn't know, as I felt nothing right now and didn't know if her doing it would bring any feeling back. Especially since it took my breaking point to do so. She asked if there was any compromise, and I told her again, if in a month I felt like there was enough reason to stay together I would, but that there was no guarantee that my feelings would return. But I would match any effort she also put out. She was frustrated by my answer, but I said that's how it would be. She gave me a piece of paper to look at that she was working on last night that had a list of hobbies and interests she wanted to look into, the two major ones being photography and cooking again. She told me that she was looking into these while also showing me her phone, giving proof that she was putting in applications on Indeed and Glassdoor for some entry-level positions that she might get hired in. I told her if she was able to show enough passion or interest in these hobbies that she showed, I would not care about her working, just anything to improve herself. But if she didn't do anything at all, then it would be best to look for a new job to help her if she moves out. I've also received private messages asking if I have any close friends to talk to. There are 2 female coworkers at the hospital whom I confide in, mainly because we spend so many hours together, and I completely trust them. In my opinion, they're incredibly grounded. Both of them have warned me that I'll likely be love-bombed and that things will eventually revert to how they were before. They've urged me to stand firm in my decision to move on. They've been incredibly supportive, even offering to let me stay over for a few nights, saying that remaining in the same space as her would only make me more susceptible to manipulation. While I appreciated their offer, it didn't feel right since I'm still technically in a relationship. However, I told them I'd consider it if things worsened. Given how much I respect their perspectives, I try to take their advice to heart. Despite many of you, both privately and openly, warning me that this is a mistake, I still want to give this one last chance. That said, I remain emotionally closed off, guarded, and indifferent about our current situation. Still, some of you have pointed out that with enough effort from both sides, things could potentially change. I've also taken the advice of those suggesting I cut off intimacy, which was my plan from the start, by continuing to sleep in the living room. However, every night, she insists on sleeping on the floor beside me, even when I tell her I'd rather be alone with my thoughts. She keeps telling me this is something she refuses to accept. That's everything for now. My next update will likely be at the 1-month mark since there's nothing else I feel the need to share at this point. For now, I'm just waiting to see if any real change happens now that we're supposedly working on this. Updates. A lot has happened in the past 2 weeks, it honestly feels more like a month with everything that's gone on. To those I've been messaging on Reddit about my situation, I apologize for not responding. About a week ago, my inbox blew up again with over 100+ messages, and I decided to take a break. I haven't logged in for a while as I've been focusing on dealing with things in my own life. I've decided not to post in subreddits about my problems anymore. Instead, I'll be documenting everything here on my page, as I feel more comfortable updating only those who genuinely care about my well-being. Last week, my girlfriend was extremely proactive. It was almost like a manic burst of energy as she threw herself into various activities, trying to find something she could enjoy. As promised, I met her halfway and did my best to support her efforts. The only hobby she has really stuck with so far is photography. She's always had a stockpile of clothes she's collected over the years, and she ended up selling some on Depop to afford a Canon 250D camera, which she says is a good option for beginners. She's done far more research on this than I have, so I took her word for it. I have a strong feeling she's committing to this hobby because it gives her an excuse to spend more time with me. She frequently asks me to go out into the city with her to take pictures and test her camera. Since I promised to match her effort and didn't want to be a hypocrite, I went along, even after long shifts at the hospital. There was a major change in her behavior, however. While she usually was a very loving and affectionate partner, it had been turned up to its max during the first week. She asked me maybe 8 times a day how I was doing, if I was upset, what I wanted to do for the rest of the day, etc., just trying to gauge my mood. When we went out, her PDA was also maxed. She wanted to kiss, hold hands, and spend the night out as long as possible, even when I said I had to go in early to work the next day. It's hard to describe in words what she was doing. I don't know if it was exactly love bombing, but with the energy she putting out, I was fully expecting a crash to come, and it did during the second week. I'll talk about that in another post. There was only so much I could handle before I needed a break, especially with how I was still feeling after everything that had happened prior. My friends at work are the only other people I have been engaging with, and I've told them everything that has been happening. They warned me again that I was getting love-bombed like they predicted and it would only get worse. They asked me what I would do if I was stuck with her longer than 2 months, and I said my lease would be ending soon, so it was helping ease my mind, as I wouldn't mind moving if this all turned out for the worse, while still giving her enough time of a heads up. My coworkers expressed concern that I seemed more tired than usual at work and that it was becoming noticeable. I reassured them that I was fine, but over the weekend, they insisted that I get out of my apartment for a while, saying that too much time alone wasn't good for my mental health in my current situation. At first, I declined their offer, but when they asked again on the day of, I decided to go. I ended up spending most of the day with them and, to my surprise, had a genuinely great time. It significantly lifted my mood. Naturally, my girlfriend was curious about where I had been all day. I told her I was with friends, and while she was disappointed that we didn't get to go out together, I reassured her that we'd spend the entire next day together. I continue to receive messages telling me to drop my friends, accusing them of manipulating my decisions. Think what you will, but I know they are good people who genuinely care about me. They played a big role in helping me quit smoking this year, something that, while making me more anxious at times, has massively improved my health. There's a unique bond that forms between people in our work environment, and I trust my coworkers completely. That's about everything from the first week. If I were to go over everything that happened in the second week, this post would be 3 times as long. It's also difficult to process since it all happened so recently, and I still feel emotionally raw. Writing everything out has always been therapeutic for me, which is a big part of why I'm posting this update. Thanks again for all your messages. I'll do my best to reply to those. I promise to keep updated with more relevant details. Update. This is going to be a long post, just a heads up. I've been holding off on writing this for a while because every time I start, I find myself needing to stop. But now that over a month has passed, I feel like it's the right time to reflect. Some parts of this post might not flow perfectly in chronological order. Since I've been writing in multiple sittings and taking breaks in between, there might be some inconsistencies in tense depending on when I started and stopped. When I said the emotional crash would come, I was right. It was messy, loud, and in some ways, could have been avoided. Looking back, when I wrote my last update, I wasn't in the best mental state. Reflecting on the previous week and putting everything into words helped calm me down. I'm also a little embarrassed to admit that I started smoking again, at least a little. It helped more than I expected, especially when I felt like I was nearing a complete breakdown. Without my friends, I didn't have many other coping mechanisms, but I didn't want to involve them in this situation, so I kept my struggles to myself. At one point, during one of our outings in the city, my girlfriend seemed to be in a low mood. When we got back home, she told me I was acting dismissive and asked if I was upset or angry with her. Trying to be better with communicating, I said that I was getting uncomfortable with her constant need of affirmation and affection, as it was continually constant. Given that she was still sleeping in the living room at night, I was getting no time alone to myself at all while at home, and after so many outings, I was starting to get physically and emotionally drained. Truthfully, I felt physically tired more than anything, and given what my coworkers and my girlfriend say, it tends to show on my face more worse than it is. My girlfriend seemed to take this heavily, and didn't attempt to talk with me for the remainder of the day, along with the next, but was in a much more brooding mood during the second. Maybe it would have been better to apologize or communicate better during that point, as it might have been the point that a lot of this could have been avoided if I said something, but I instead took the time to nap and spend time alone, which I had rarely the chance to for over a week. Then came the third day. A lot happened over the course of this day, and a lot was said, and this was where the breaking point occurred, which caused further problems throughout the following week. I will try to be as thorough as I can, remembering everything that happened, from the start of the day to the end. When I had woken up, I had left without saying goodbye or speaking to my girlfriend as I was almost running late. Normally I at least check on her to see what she's doing before I leave. She had been sleeping in our room for the last few days since her mood dropped. My mood at work was noticeably better than usual. I was well rested, had some time to myself, and was genuinely enjoying my shift, which didn't happen often. There had been several occasions when my coworkers invited me to grab a meal after work, but I had been turning them down for weeks. On this particular day, however, I decided to join them. I ended up getting home around 9 p.m. or later, having had a few drinks. This is the part where writing becomes difficult for me, where I usually stop. When I arrived home, I found my girlfriend sitting in the living room, staring straight at me as I walked in. She didn't say a word. It startled me. She wasn't on her phone, wasn't watching TV, just sitting there, as if she'd been staring at the wall before I entered. I asked what she was doing. Instead of answering, she asked where I had been. I told her I was out with friends. Immediately, she asked if it was my coworkers. She knows that I primarily work with women, and before our relationship reached this point, I had mentioned my friends to her. I told her yes, I had gone out to eat with them. She then asked if I had been drinking. I wasn't sure if it was obvious or if she was just asking, but I admitted that I had. An uncomfortable silence followed. It felt much longer in my memory than it probably was. Eventually, she brought up the month-long deadline I had set to determine whether my feelings would change. She asked if they had. The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before responding. After a moment, I told her that I appreciated the effort she had been putting in, but I was still unsure about our future together and couldn't give her a definite answer. She told me again that during our outings together, that I was being dismissive, and that she felt I wasn't putting in the same effort to make this relationship work. I asked what she meant, as I was going out with her whenever she asked and matching her effort in finding hobbies whenever she thought of something she enjoyed. To me it just seemed like something she was just saying out of neediness. I think it was at this point she started to lose her composure, as her voice couldn't remain constant. She told me if I was aware that I wasn't smiling when we were outside, that I was quiet and rarely talked when we were spending time together. I told her she already knew how I felt, so for some of it, my mixed feelings shouldn't come as surprise. But I also explained again my lack of talking was just from being tired from work, but I don't think she believed me. She told me she's constantly overthinking how I feel now that she knows I've lost feelings, and doesn't know what she can do to make them come back. I told her again to just find a passion for something, anything, to get out of bed and be active with anything in her life. She says it's been 2 weeks and she's been as active as she can possibly be, to the point that it was causing her mental stress, but my mood wasn't improving, and she's wondering if anything will actually change now that it's closer to a month. And then came the full breakdown. Through tears and a broken voice, she tells me how much she loves me, how much affection and love she has given me throughout this relationship, just for me to throw it away over something as stupid as my conditions, as if it was just an excuse to end things, if I ever really loved her at all while we were together. She goes on to say that even with how upset she is at me, and how hurt and betrayed she has felt by the one person she has, that she still loves me and wants to continue our relationship. She tells me there will be nothing for her if I leave, no one, no place, no future, her will to live will be gone and she won't know what to do with herself. Now there's a lot I could have said during this, but I don't think I can accurately convey just how hard she was breaking down emotionally during this exchange. There were points as to where she was almost screaming, completely bawling, and it all just made me freeze, as this was the first time I've ever witnessed her fall apart at this level. She goes on again to say there's no reason to live if this is the end, it won't matter what job she gets, another month will not be enough, and she knows I still won't want to be with her, and that she will have nothing. After our conversation, she locked herself in our room again and stayed there for several days. Every time I knocked to try and talk, she would scream at me to go away, so I did. A few days later, she finally calmed down enough for us to have a conversation. Her attitude completely shifted. Though she was still upset, she was also extremely apologetic. She told me that a lot of what she had said and done was in the heat of the moment and that she didn't mean it. Having those days to myself, without her or my friends, gave me the mental clarity to finally do what I should have done a month ago. I told her, as gently and calmly as I could, that it was over. That there was no longer a chance for us to be together, and I didn't want to be in this relationship anymore. I assured her she could stay for 2 more months until she found a job, and I would help her get on her feet. But if she wasn't able to secure something by then, I would be the one to leave. She started crying again. This time, it felt more like a quiet acceptance, and for a moment, I almost wavered. But she agreed to the terms, and it was finally done. About a week later, she managed to get a part-time job at a supermarket, the only position they were offering at the time. After our final conversation, we barely spoke. When she wasn't at work, she would spend the rest of her day and night alone in her room. I continued sleeping on the couch, but at this point, I had gotten so used to it that I didn't mind. I hesitate to say this because it feels selfish, but I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom and relief. I didn't immediately tell my coworkers about the breakup. Whenever they asked, I just vaguely said we were still working on things. But in reality, I started going out with them a lot more after work. Staying in the apartment felt suffocating and depressing, so I avoided it whenever I could. I had hit a high that I had not felt in a long while, and then everything came crashing on me the following week. I had contracted pneumonia, and was off work for about 2 weeks to recover. At first I thought I had caught a cold, but one day it hit like a brick and my lungs felt at 50% capacity. I couldn't take a deep breath without going into a fit of coughing and I constantly felt fatigued. Even now as I write this update with most of my symptoms gone, I still have to use an inhaler to help myself breathe at times. For most of the days that I had been sick I was sleeping, most days between 12 to 14 hours, and the time that I was awake I was lying down. When I told her what I had contracted and she saw how sick I was, she offered to let me have the bedroom again, but I refused and said that I was fine. Since she was working part-time, there was still a lot of time that she was spending at home, and for the first few days she left me alone. But towards the middle of the first week I was sick, she started to occasionally check on me to see if I was okay and if I wanted anything to eat. Honestly, I hated that me being sick forced us to interact, not because I was mad or anything, but because it felt incredibly weird and awkward, and that I had to depend on her now for a few things not even a week after we had broken up. I didn't feel well enough to get groceries like I normally did, and since she already worked at a supermarket she insisted that she buy food instead, and when I gave her my card she refused it and said she would buy it herself. For the most part one was snacking on fruit and cookies, but she said if I was going to get better that I eat actual meals, so she began to cook for me even when I said I didn't want anything. Even with this, we didn't eat together for the first week as she went back to her room after checking on me. At the start of the second week of being home, she began sitting with me while I was awake and talking to me. She shared stories about her day at work, her coworkers, and various other things. It felt like she had been wanting to tell me these things earlier but hadn't been able to because everything was still too raw. Once she started talking, she didn't stop, and honestly, I enjoyed listening. It felt different, more natural, more familiar. What started as simple conversations eventually turned into us watching TV together on nights when I couldn't sleep. From there, we began opening up about the issues we had been keeping to ourselves for so long. It was surprisingly cathartic. There was no yelling or arguing, just listening. It felt like the way we used to talk years ago, before we were in a relationship, back when we were just friends and classmates. Sometime during the second week, I got really sick. I didn't feel like talking or doing anything, but I also couldn't sleep because of constant coughing. That day, she didn't go to work. Instead, she stayed by my side, making sure I was eating and drinking water. We didn't talk much, but her presence was comforting. There's a lot I could say about how those 2 weeks made me feel, about her, about everything that's happened, but I struggle to put it into words, much less writing. All I can say is that it gave me a lot to think about. Since recovering, I've made more of an effort to talk to her, but without forcing it like I might have a month ago. We've had casual conversations, about her photography, how work is going, whether she likes her boss, just random topics. She's been spending less time alone in her room and more time in the living room with me after I get home, telling me about her day, her customers, and her coworkers. In turn, I share bits about my own day. Over the past few weeks, the transition from being in a relationship to being friends has become more apparent. It feels more natural this way, and communication has become easier. Even so, there's still a barrier between us, something left behind from our final argument. I can't quite put it into words, but I know it's there. The deadline I set for moving out is the end of October, when my lease expires. I'll post another update around that time. This post ended up being much longer than I expected, but looking back on everything and seeing how our situation has evolved has been helpful. If you're still here reading this, thank you for sticking around and for the messages. Sorry if I haven't been able to respond in the meantime.